So we're going to take a look at the Mishnah on Daf Yud, Kol Get. And this has to do with kusim that were brought to the land of Israel by Sancheriv to fill in the place of the Jews that were sent into exile, the Aseres HaShvatim, in Malachim Bey's Perek Yud Zayin. And there was a situation of what's called Gerei Arayos, meaning as a result of the fact that the Kusim were worshiping idols, they were attacked by lions, and they were afraid of the lions, and they decided to convert to Judaism. And we have the famous sugya in Perek Asar Yuchsin and Kiddushin Daf Ayin Hey, whether or not we recognize that Gerus. Rabbi Akiva recognizes and validates their Gerus, and Rabbi Shmuel disagrees. Rabbi Shmuel says Gerei Arayos are not considered Gerim. They only were motivated to join the Jewish people because of their fear of the lions in this case, and there's no validity to their Gerus. Our sugi that we're about to learn, by way of introduction, would reflect the shita of Rabbi Akiva that they were Gerei Emes. And that means the following, that even though Rabbi Akiva recognizes the validity of the Gerus, however, even he concedes that we don't rely on their nemanus in all dinei Torah. They never accepted upon themselves certain dinim, and for sure not dinim derabanan, and therefore they weren't trustworthy. They did not have credibility in a Jewish court of law. And the Rambam elsewhere in Pirush HaMishnayos in the 8th Perek of Brachos explains that these people, the Kusim, who were brought by Sancheriv from a place called Kusa, and they were settled by Sancheriv in the land of Shomron, in the cities of Shomron, and the Torah testifies about these people as Hashem hayu yireim v'esalohayim hayu ovdim, that on the one hand they were God-fearing individuals, but on the other hand, at the same time, they continued to worship their gods. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed them to stay in the land, under the assumption, the hope that with the passage of time, they would study the Torah, and maybe they would accept the interpretation of the Torah, of Torah Shebal Peh, of the Prushim. Now, those mitzvos that they accepted upon themselves, they steadfastly observed these mitzvos, and they had a chazakah of clinging to the religion of Israel with regard to those mitzvos. And some of them even desisted from worshiping Avodah Zarah. However, the Chachamim, according to the Gemara in Chulin, investigated them, and they found that on a certain mountain, they were makadshim, they sanctified, I guess, some sort of an animal, in this case a bird actually, and they set up on that har, on Har Gerizim, they set up a Dmus Yonah. And Chazal discovered that they were worshiping that Dmus Yonah as an idol. And at that point in history, Chazal diminished, or shall we say, downgraded their status. They no longer could be considered as goyim, as gerim, but rather as they were considered as goyim. And what we're going to learn in our Mishnah regarding the Kusim is that they were considered somewhere between, in that middle gray area. I guess you'd call it the area in which they were ma'ulim. They were greater than the goyim, but yet grew in Yisrael. And we have, for example, in the Mishnah in Brachos, the issue about whether we can invite a kusi to be part of a zimun, and whether or not they could make a bracha. There are many, many different issues with regard to the status of a kusi. But in certain sense, when Chazal, the Chachamim went out and investigated the kusim, and they found that they were worshiping idols or gods, they were in a sense worse than goyim. They were placed on a level that's lower than the goyim. In any event, our Mishnah is addressing the case of a kusi who signed on a shtar. He's one of the signatures, one of the signators, I would say, on a get, in this case. And kol get sheyesh alav eid kusi, the Mishnah says, if one of the eidim, besides the Yisrael who signed on the get, is a kusi, possible, we cannot accept the testimony of a kusi because he is suspect of false testimony based on the fact that they were worshiping, as we said before, the Tamus of Yonah. However, when the Mishnah uses the term get and says kol get, it's referring to shtar. So instead of the word get, we read it as if it says shtar. And how do I know this? Because in the exception to the rule, in the next part of the Mishnah, it says chutz mi Gittin noshim v'shechrurei avodim, which means that if you have a get isha or a get shichr eved, and one of the signators on that get is a kusi, then the shtar is kosher. And the Gemara is going to go through an analysis of this Mishnah, and we're going to talk about Rabbi Elazar's shita, that an eid kusi is kosher only if we know about that particular kusi, that he is a chaver, that he is observant of the law, and therefore he's not choshed al sheker. Otherwise, if he's choshed al sheker, then he's called a rosh, and he's possible for all Eidei Yoshev Torah, as the Torah says in Parshas Mishpatim al Teishes Yodcha Rosh Lios Eid Chamos. So how could a kusi, who should be suspect of perjuring himself, of Eider Sheker, how can it be kosher to sign on Gittin Noshim and Shechrurei Avodim? Now, this is a question that we have to address. I don't know if we'll get to it today. But keep in mind that if the shtar, whether it's a Gittin Noshim, Shechrurei Avodim, was signed by two Eidim Kusim, then for sure the shtar is possible. So the Gemara says, Man Masnisen, who is the author of our Mishnah? Lo Ketanakama, Lo Kerab Elazar, V'lo Kerab Shimon Gamliel. The Sanya we learned in a Brisa, Matzas Kusi Muteres. Are you allowed to eat a matzah that was baked by a kusi on Pesach? And the Tanakama is of the opinion that you're allowed to eat that matzah. We're not going to be choshesh that the matzah is really chametz. because the Kusim are very careful about that which is written in the Torah, and the Torah itself tells us that we're not allowed to eat chametz. And this is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And we said before that as far as the Rabbanans are concerned, they were careless. But here, when we're talking about chametz on Pesach, they're not chashid to violate an isur that's written explicitly in the Torah. Another halacha that's relevant to matzah is, in addition to the fact that a kusi is not chashid on isur chametz, he's even reliable on what's called shmiras matzah. And we have the pasuk says ushmartem es hamatzos, and the kusi is believed to put forward the claim that he guarded the matzah, he supervised the matzah, made sure it wouldn't become chametz. And all this is l'shem chiyuv mitzvahs matzah, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa. We'll soon see that the Tanoim disagree with the Tanna Kama. Now, the Adam Yotzi Bo Yidei Chovaso B'Pesach, so that not only are the Kusim relied upon, according to the Tanna Kama, to make sure and guarantee that there's no chibutz going on over here, and it's not chametz, but moreover, you can use that matzah baked by a kusi for the mitzvah of matzah. And you can fulfill the positive mitzvah of Ba'erev Tochlu Matzos, because the kusim are experts and meticulous about Shmira Samatzah Gittin. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Elazar, on the other hand, rejects the Tanna Kama completely and oser. You're not allowed to eat the matzah that was baked by a kusi, not only on the first night of Pesach, but not even on the balance of Pesach. They are chashud on chametz. So we have to treat their baked matzahs as chametz. Rav Shimon Gamliel is a third opinion. And he basically reformulates in an abstract principle the underlying logic of the Tanna Kama. We'll see exactly where he disagrees with the Tanna Kama. But V'yomer, he states that called mitzvah shechziku ba'kusim harbe diktaku medagdakim ba yosem Yisrael. Those mitzvahs that the kusim accepted upon themselves, and they are very meticulous about observing those mitzvahs. That's called ichziku b'hem kusim. They are medagdik in those mitzvahs to fulfill them kehilchasa, even beyond that of Yisrael. And we're not going to be choshed them that they would violate such mitzvahs, and we can rely on them. And apparently the language of Rav Shimon Gamliel kol mitzvah indicates that Rav Shimon Gamliel went a step further than the Tanna Kama. The Tanna Kama only accepted the reliability of the kusim for matzahs doraisa, matzah doraisa, to be guaranteed that there was no chametz. But on a drabanan level, then the kusim, according to the Tanna Kama, are not to be relied upon for a drabanan. It seems that from the language of Shimon Gamliel, kol mitzvah, etc., kusim, even if it wasn't written in the Torah, even if a mitzvah is only drabanan. And now the Gemara comes back to our Mishnah and tries to prove that our Mishnah does not jive with any of the three Tanoim. You cannot reconcile with any of the three Tanoim. Tanna Kama, if according to the Tanna Kama who holds that a kusi is relied upon on that which is explicit in the Torah, then let's take Gittin Noshim, and there's a kusi that's signed on a get. Why would be machshir? How could the Mishnah validate the chasim of a kusi but only in these exceptional cases of Gittin Noshim and Shechrei Avodim. The Shita the Tanakama is that which is in the Torah. The Kosim are careful about it. The Torah says, Midvar Sheker Tirchak, and the Kosim presumably are meticulous about everything in the Torah, and therefore we should not limit the validity and the reliability of a kusi to the cases of Gittin Noshim and Shechrei Avodim. But any shtar that's signed by a kusi, we should rely on the kusi, that he's telling the truth, and we should not be suspect to them that they would violate the Isur of Eidos Sheker. And the Torah says, Lo sana b'riachet shaker. Not only is there a general Isur of Sheker, but there's a specific Isur to a person who perjures himself in false testimony in a court of law. So that part of our Mishnah, which says that a shtar sheishel aved kusi is possible, could not possibly be reconciled with the Shita Tanakama. Okay, fine. But we have another two Shitas in the Brisa. We have Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says you can't rely on a kusi at all, even for something that's mefurish in the Torah like matzah. We're afraid that the matzah that he's selling us is chametz. So why would the Mishnah be machshir and validate a get that's signed by a kusi? Even if you'll tell me, well, wait a minute, Gittin Noshim Adoraisa, but we don't rely on the matzah of a kusi. And therefore, if you get Isha Namilo, we should not be able to be machshir a get that was signed by a kusi. Chashin on Eidos Sheker. The Rab Shimon Gamliel, okay, we have a third option here. And it all depends upon Hichziku Bakusi or Lo Hichziku Bakusi. So let's try to figure out. Were the Kusim careful about Sheker? And they would never lie in their testimony. And therefore, Idi Achzuk, if they were Machzik in Kpeda, and they were medagdik as far as the laws of Gittin and Shtaros, and they would not falsify their testimony, is afilu b'shar Shtaros nami. Then we have the same kasha that we had on the Tanakama. Why would we passel the shtar that was signed by a kusiv, the lo achzuk? And if you're going to tell me that the kusim never really accepted and committed themselves to the Isur of Sheker, and that's called Lo Echziku Lahakpid on Gittin and Shtaros, is afilu get Isha Namilo. They should not be accepted on the testimony of Gittin Noshim. So the Gemara says, you know what? Maybe we could still reconcile our Mishnah and the distinction between Shar Shtaros, where we don't accept a Kusi, and the case of Gittin Noshim, according to Rabbi Gamliel. Our Mishnah is really Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And the reason why Kusim are relied upon in Gittin Noshim Shechrei Avodim is because Achzik Behu. The Kusim were very careful and they dedicated and committed themselves to be makpid on the laws of Gittin Noshim and Shechrei Avodim, and therefore they have credibility. But v'lo Achzik Beha, but as far as Shar Shtaros are concerned, they weren't committed to only sign a shtar if it's true without perjuring themselves. Gemara says, my area afilu train nami. I have another problem. The Mishnah says that under what circumstances are we machshir a get noshim with a signature of a kusi? That's only if he was the only kusi that signed on it. There was only one kusi signed on it, and the other signature was that of Yisrael. Well, according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, if the kusim who are gerei emes and achzik behu, and they were very careful about not lying with regard to Noshim, Gittin Noshim, and Shulchan Avodim, as afilu trei nami, even if there were two kusim that was signed on the get, we should be machshir the get. Alama Amar Rabbi Lazar, again, this is Rabbi Lazar, the Amora, I think. Yeah, I think so. Lo Hichshirubo, he's interpreting our Mishnah, Ela Eid Kusi Echad Bilvad. If there's only one aid out of the two witnesses, that's a Kusi. And the answer is Liola Rabbi Lazar. Let's go back to the possibility that was suggested that we reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Lazar, who holds a Kusim, Achashudim, even on mitzvos, Haksuvas B'Torah. The aid Kusi is signed above. The aid Yisrael is signed below. And in that set of circumstances, as we'll see in a minute, the Mishnah felt logically compelled to accept and to validate the chasim of a Kusi because the aid Yisrael was signed below them, below the signature of the Kusi. So when you have an aid Yisrael below the Kusi, then, as we'll explain now, we will rely on the aid Kusi, and his signature will be valid.